Welcome to The Essentials. I'm Rob Swinar. Today I have Drew May in, who is a landscape photographer who travels all over Alberta and into some other provinces to talk about his travels, how he got into photography, how he got into landscape photography, and where he sees everything going in that field. So welcome.
Hi.
So let's back up right to the beginning. Let's talk about some of your history.
Okay. Well, I'm like many young fellows. I started with a gift, Christmas gift, when I was 8 years old, obviously, of a Kodak 110, piece of junk. But I ran through the roll of film. I thought it was cool, and that was the start. From there on, it was just whatever I could get a hold of until I turned like 18 years old, and girls were more important. And got over that phase and finally bought myself my first DSLR when I was almost 20, I believe. And by that time I was shooting semi-professional, I guess you would say. I was working for, I was doing some fashion shooting and taking some landscape courses and stuff like that, learning what I liked the most about landscapes, and went on from there.
Where'd you grow up?
I was born in New York State, small town New York State, near a city called Utica. Moved here when I was 9, straight to Edmonton. Never moved from Edmonton until I got married the first time. And then I moved to Fort McMurray, Alberta. Ooh, what a beautiful place. And then from there it was travel. So, but I don't travel in the air. I used to do a lot of driving. That's my primary reality.
I was mentioning before on a previous podcast that I think you told me one time that you put. I thought you said 300K, but I don't know how much do you put on a year generally?
I've gone as high as 140.
That's significant.
140,000 in a year. The latest car I have right now, I bought it in June, and by December, I had 32,000 kilometers on it.
Do you when you're traveling? Maybe we should go back a little bit. So, with the photography, how did you end up with the landscape? Like, walk me through the process of going. What did you try first? Did you do landscape first, or did you do portraits?
I was always interested in landscape. I've always been interested in landscape. I did do a lot of art courses when I was in elementary and junior high and high school, and I always leaned towards the natural world. I've always been kind of intrigued by nature. And I'm a relatively patient fellow. I'm quite comfortable to sit and wait for the sun to set or the sun to rise or whatever. So it just kind of seemed natural to have a camera in front of me and get the best light and look for the best light. And my first inspiration was my uncle. He was a professional photographer. He was a professional wedding photographer, but he did landscape work and used to have a thing for airplanes and did a lot of photographs of airplanes and stuff like that. So, and that's where it started. That's basically where it all stemmed from. And I did take some serious courses in landscape work. But it's not the easy road, is landscape, when it comes to making a living. So,
how do you where do you make the money off of it? Is it print sales?
Right now, it's all about print sales.
It's prints.
Yeah, it's all about prints for me. But I'm also starting to branch out into seminars and I'm looking at actually starting to do workshops,
Teaching.
teaching.
That'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're out and about, how do you find the places that you go to? Do you go to this? Is it something that you hear from other people, or you just have an idea and you just kind of go out and see what you can find?
At first, it's I point to a direction and I drive in that direction. See what I can find. And I seek out an inspiration from that. Other times I will ride with people who I know, and they know certain areas, and I will go to those areas and I'll see things that I am attracted to as opposed to what they're attracted to. And most times it's the process of trying to teach myself to see, and not just going there because everybody else has been there.
Right.
So I abhor that kind of photograph personally.
The same photos as everybody else type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I guess everybody has to take the tourist shot, but I went to, as a perfect example, I went to Moraine Lake in Banff for the first time in 30 years. I went there with a friend of mine, and everybody and their dog is taking the same photograph, the 10 peaks, sunset, blah, 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 always the same thing. I said to my friend that there had to be 4,000 people at that spot. There was way too many people. So I said to him, let's just take the trail. Let's just go away. And that presented a completely different vision. And it was, we spent more time looking at a little tiny stream that was going into the lake. Studying how the stream had its curves and its twists and the waterfall part routine. I mean, it was only falling maybe an inch and a half, but there's a waterfall there.
Right.
Or we would find a log on the beach and use it as a foreground element to what's in the background. Just don't follow the course of everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle sometimes, but it's in the end I think you make better pictures because you're just making something that's, people go, that was shot where? I was there and I didn't see that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
To me, always the best shots usually are the ones you had to sweat to make. So if I have to walk through knee-deep water to get it, I have to walk through knee-deep water to get it.
How long do you, some people know that I shoot photography for a hobby. How long did it take for you to get your eye? Like when you first started? Or do you even remember?
I can't really say. What I do remember most of my past was by simple economics. We shot black and white.
Yeah.
And we had to learn to see in black and white, which means we're going to be looking at shape and light and tone. We're not going to be looking at, what's the spectacular thing that's going to smack you in the face kind of routine. And this also allows you, when you're doing portraiture in black and white, again, it really hones your abilities.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm a very distinct follower of Ansel Adams and what he has done. But I also like Edward Weston, Joseph Karsh. I love the old masters. I love how they saw. And it helped. That's molded a lot of my vision. And from that point on, when I started to go back into color, it allowed me to actually see things in a different way, as opposed to what people do now, which is, take a photograph in digital and says, oh, well, I think that'll look good in black and white.
They flip it, yeah.
Yeah, whereas I would look at it in black and white and go, it's black and white. There's no flipping. You're stuck with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've shot landscape and never thought of it in that context. I always think of it in shadow, light versus shadow, but that definitely would be more appealing for sure to get a handle on with the black and white.
Yeah, I did a short-term job. I was kind of a part-time assistant to a photographer. He gave me a camera, a roll of film, and told me to go out behind the studio and get 30 good shots out of the roll of 36. What he was basically telling me to do is learn how to see.
Yeah.
It worked. He never critiqued anything. He wanted me to actually try to see. I'm actually I do it a lot, where I look down or look up. My head's on a swivel all the time. It never stops. But it's forced me to look, as opposed to so many people will see it in a brochure and want to capture what they see in a brochure. I don't care what the brochure. I actually want to create something that will end up on a brochure, because they'll think of it as something special, as opposed to following the crowd.
The other thing that happens too is what happens quite regularly is people just they'll shoot 50 shots and they'll end up with 10% or 5% that are decent. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of inefficiency there in current photographers' habits in that regard. So,
and it's not to put anyone down today. It's just people don't study composition either. They don't try to see what composition dictates. There's a science to it, if you want to call it, but there is a method, and if you pay attention to that method, it applies to everything you do. Understanding humanity and how humans see is part of composition. And as long as you grab hold of that, you can make images that will be appealing, not only to yourself, but to potential customers or potential interest in your work.
So when you go out, do you have a vision of what you're looking for, or do you just look?
Sometimes I have a vision. If I'm going to Jasper, for example, I have a quest that I want to go back to Jasper this summer. I want to get a reflection in a high alpine lake. I have the vision in my head. Whether it'll ever happen, I don't know, but I'm going to try to make it happen. But for the majority of times, if I'm heading east, I will actually... my first desire is to follow my. I have projects that I've always followed. Like the project that I've always done is religious buildings, like rural religious buildings. I'm not interested in the urban ones.
So you have an ongoing shooting system as you're out and about to add to that portfolio.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I do elevators, because they're few and far between and they're disappearing. And I also do rural churches, places of faith, I call it. And within that, I have an interest in graveyards and how they're taken care of in these days, how they're maintained, and because they used to be very, very elaborate. Now they're nowhere near that now.
Yeah.
With those starts, those reasons to go out, it allows me to go, well, I'm looking for this, but if something else comes along, perfect. It helps me see other things as well. And when I'm going to a place like Jasper or Banff, I will have the same thing intention. Like, I want to do so-and-so, whatever it might be at the time.
All right.
Being Jasper and Banff, there isn't really much else other than mountains and streams and lakes and, trees and stuff like that, paths, that kind of thing. But that is the most popular form of photography, because it is the easiest form of photography.
Easy access. Yeah.
Yes. And it's also easy interpretation. If you're it's easy to make a photograph. It's like I say about portrait photography. It's easy to become popular taking photographs of beautiful women. It isn't because of your talents. It's because the woman is beautiful.
That's true. Yeah.
And landscape photography is exactly the same thing. easily become popular taking photographs of mountains and spectacular vistas. It isn't easy taking photographs of mundane crops and farms and broken down old buildings. Making those broken down buildings look gorgeous with gorgeous light. There's a struggle, and that brings more intention, more interest to the image.
Do you find that, speaking of objects in that sense, do you focus on portrait style photography for the objects? I'm not sure what the right terminology is, but where you are taking a building and turning it into a portraiture shot of that building, or do you expand that shot not so much as a portrait but as a scene, like different composition, like, or do you do it same thing? Do you just see what's there and shoot it and find the story?
The opposite.
Yeah,
I actually shoot landscapes when I shoot portraits. I see in landscape. I compose in landscape, and I bring that back to my portraiture. It's completely different things. They're in no way alike in any way.
Yeah.
But when I shoot weddings, for example, whenever I'm shooting a wedding, yes, it's very important to do all the traditional images. But for me, it's very important to put a landscape photograph within that image, within that grouping. So getting the couple as part of the landscape is very, very important to me. And I usually end up shooting a lot of country weddings, not urban weddings. So to me, landscape is very important. We are all part of the landscape. And ignoring that it's to our folly. I've always landscape first, portrait second. However it is.
What on the sale, when you sell the prints, what do people gravitate to more, or is it just individual on the images that they're looking at? Like, do you see more people like to purchase a landscape, a vista shot, or do they actually like the portrait shots of like the barn that's broken or what have you, like a post or graveyard or whatever? Do you notice?
Primarily, the majority of my stuffs have been the Grand Vista. Majority of stuff I sell is Grand Vista. Be it that there's a barn in it or whatever, it's still a Grand Vista. It's an emotional attachment that most people have to a specific image. Like I do a lot of lightning photography as well. And people are drawn to the lightning because it's an emotional factor. And to me, it's highly important to have a to compose that image.
Right.
Not just take a photograph of lightning. I see that a lot with people. They'll take a photograph of lightning just for the sake of taking a photograph of lightning, and they'll do the same thing with auroras. They'll just take a photograph of aurora, but they don't want to compose anything. They don't want to slow down for 1 second and actually take the photograph. And to me, that's 99% of it. Composition, number one. Everything else is number two. But for sales, really, the only thing that really sells is, for me personally, is a composed grand landscape for the vast majority. Be it that it's the stuff I've sold mostly has been lightning. That's sold a lot. I've sold a lot of lightning photographs. A lot of severe storm imagery has sold, and I've taken one photograph of a train, and I seem to have sold that over and over and over again. I don't know why. Haven't got a clue. I'm not really a train guy, but
there are people that are fascinated with locomotives. Yeah. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, it's quite a group of people. Yeah. And I do a lot of art. I do art walks. I didn't do it very much last year, but I did the year before. and the majority of my sales have always ended up being basically about $150, $200 sale kind of routine, framed, finished, ready to go on the wall. Relatively small to me, relatively small. But then I will turn around and I will sell a $1,000 36 by 24 for the wall. The drop of a hat. The person will go, I want that. And it's emotional connection. It's whatever they're physically in their own minds attached to.
Do you have specific seasons that you go out, or are you out all the time?
I'm out all the time. I don't go out as much in the wintertime, mostly because I have no interest in flat gray skies, especially like you look out right now, the skies aren't exactly enthusiastic. I like to see some mood in the cloud. I'm drawn to that, so that has an effect on my enthusiasm, for lack of a better word.
I'm sure the -40 doesn't help much.
The coldest I have photographed was -52.
That's pretty cold.
With quite a heavy wind coming across Lake Athabasca. It was really cold, but that was in the film days, and I didn't want to advance the film out of fear of breaking the emulsion. I didn't. It just didn't want to break it because it was really cold.
Do you have any favorite locations that you keep finding yourself going back to?
Oh, endlessly.
Yeah.
Endlessly. I have one location that's a mere 8 minutes away from my front door. It's a reservoir. It's not a power reservoir. It's a flood control reservoir for a very small little river. But I go there constantly. I go to a specific lake called Chip Lake. I go there endlessly because it's wide, really long view, and it gives me that horizon view that you can't get normally. And I can find things in the foreground that I can actually add, that can actually be part of my composition. Jasper I go back to religiously, and there are certain areas within Jasper that I go back to over and over and over again. Being a landscape photographer is returning endlessly, always hoping for better light. I went to this one place. I went to this one swamp, and I've been there every winter for the last 7 years. There is one single dead tree sitting in the middle of the swamp. The majority of the tree on top is gone. And sad to say, this is the last year it actually fell in the spring. So this year I went back and it's gone. So I'm not going back again. I've lost my image.
The hook.
The hook for me is gone, so I'm not going to return. And of course, here's up at this latitude, because we're so far north, the sun is in a different angle, like vastly different in summer as it is in winter. It's very far south in winter, and it's fairly far north in summer. So different angle of light in almost everything. And it's nonstop.
Nothing looks the same.
Yeah. And I've gone to, I guess in the rural areas, I've gone to the little towns called, I can't remember the name of it now. Big Valley. I'm intrigued. It's got a roundhouse. It's an old cement roundhouse. All the wood is gone, and all that's left is the skeleton of the roundhouse. It's very intriguing. I've gone there 5 times in the last 3 years, and I keep getting drawn back to it.
How long? If you've been traveling throughout Alberta, I'll guess a couple of decades. So that's
give or take. Yeah.
Okay. You must have seen some serious changes in rural Alberta in regards to vacancies, towns basically becoming ghost towns.
Yeah, some are becoming very ghost towny. Some are becoming exactly the opposite. The larger the town when it started, the more likely it's got more people moving into it, like Vegreville and Stony Plain and that kind of routine. The major centers, the smaller towns, they're turning more and more into the ghost town. If the town itself, it seems that if the town itself doesn't grab onto its situation and still wants to live in the 1960s, it's going to die. If it grabs onto the fact that this is modern times and it needs to accept that there's changes and they need to understand that, then they've got a chance to actually grow. It just seems that way. The biggest change I've noticed in Alberta, and I don't know if this has anything to do with climate change or anything like that, but when I was a kid coming here, the skies here used to be so brightly blue. In the summers, it was just bright blue. And the winters, we'd rarely, if ever, have any cloud cover. We'd have a heavy snowfall, and then it'd be really, really cold, but the sun would be out. It would be bright, and it would be blue. And now we seem to be gray skies in winter and hazy blues, not deep blues anymore. We might get 1 or 2 days like that where it's a deep blue. That's the biggest thing I've seen change in these years.
That's interesting. I wonder. I mean, that's cloud formation, obviously. So I don't know anything about what dictates the different types of cloud formations, but it could be a global weather thing.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can say. I can tell you, and I know a lot of people who said this, was when they had 9/11, when they shut all the aircraft down. For those few days that they shut them down, the skies got really blue once again. I think there's too much air travel, and it's condensation. I know it's condensation. There's a lot of water in the air, probably more than anything else. But our storms I would have to say our storms aren't as intense as they used to be. We have more of them. We used to have some pretty brutal lightning storms when I was young. We seem to have a lot more lightning storms now, kind of routine in the winter. Or in the summer, I'm sorry. In the wintertime, we don't seem to have any snow in the sun. It seems to be almost no snow this year in the last few years. We'll get a dump, but most times we're dry, which unfortunately really sucks when it comes to taking pictures.
Yeah, well, you want as much variety in the shots, I'm sure. What do you get it? What do you get into hiking? Do you go up into the mountains, up into the trails, like right off the beaten paths for your locations? Have you gotten that ambitious, or because if you're driving in a direction and you find something, that's obviously something visual that you can see from your vehicle, and it's easy enough to pull over. But do you actually get into like backpacking anywhere and camping, or anything to that extreme, I guess?
Well, the last few years, I've had a personal reality that I can't partake in, but I used to do a lot of hiking.
Yeah.
When I'm going east, it's a different world. It's the hiking you'd have to walk miles and miles and miles before you saw anything different. But in Jasper, for example, I will hike, a few miles here and there, kind of routine. But I've been forced the last few years, just day trips, no overnighters. I can't do an overnighter, and that's just the way of the world for me right now. But it's changed, so I have plans to do a lot more overnight camping and a lot more hiking.
Do you find do you get into much nighttime photography?
Love nighttime photography. Yeah. Love it. Didn't used to. I used to, when I was shooting in film, I hated nighttime photography. Having to work out reciprocity failure and all that for films, and having to, your 30-second exposure is going to make it actually a minute and a half kind of routine, and having to actually know these things, not such a big deal, but there was no such thing as an app back then. now it's digital has made everything so simple. Yes, there's noise. It's something you have to deal with. As long as you're
Noise, for those that don't know, is basically a grain that shows up
Yeah.
on the imaging that is, some people like it for certain mood, but for the most part, it's actually a distraction.
yes, yeah, it's it can ruin a photograph. But knowing your gear, knowing what it can do, how far you can push it, when it comes to night photography. I love photographing. I love doing lightning work at night. I love auroras at night. I have a plan. I have a project this year to get the galactic center in an extremely dark area.
Explain that. What is that?
The Milky Way, the galactic center of the Milky Way. Get it where it's rising above the horizon, which is very difficult in our latitude. But getting it with a composition, so putting a lake, putting a mountain, putting something in there to draw the eye towards the galactic center, just to make a far more attractive photograph. And if I can get auroras going on, even more attractive. But I do a lot of aurora photograph. That's one of the things I like to shoot. And it's interesting to find cool locations to make that happen.
There seems to be more and more of auroras showing up lately too. I don't know if that has something to do with our climate, or
Well,
I think isn't it the solar rays off the sun or something like that, or that created it? I'm not even 100% sure.
To be honest with you, I can't honestly say that that's a fact. Like right now, we're going through a relatively dead time for auroras, but
Really? I thought, oh, okay.
we've had a couple of days where we've had some very intense activity. But of course, those are the days I'm usually affixed to my chair with the television in front of me and quite comfortable and happy where I'm sitting. Summer is much more comfortable to do these things. Minus 25 outside, cold is kind of not attractive. Some people are enjoying it. Some people love doing it, but I'm not. I'm a little bit too old to enjoy that now. I wait for summer to do that kind of routine.
Yeah.
But I think what you're seeing, not so much that we're having more aurora activity, but you're seeing a lot more photographs.
That's probably what it is. And I should say that I actually believe that it's solar flares that are the cause. That's what they figure it is, from the sun. So before people jump on me because I said it might be climate change,
Yeah.
I was just leaping
Yeah.
to a thought and right off the cliff. So
There's always a few that will find something to glom onto and carry on, but that's no big deal.
So when you're doing your shots and everything, and then you start putting them online, like, do you submit your stuff to magazines? I know that you've been in a newspaper.
I send stuff to Nat Geo and Canadian Geographic on occasion. To me, it's got. As a photographer, we are our worst critics. So we look at a photograph and think, oh no, I better not do that. I better not send that. That's a lousy photograph. And I sent a photograph to Canadian Geographic, thinking that it was, maybe it'll make it. It actually was number one. They picked it, but I thought of it as weak. That's the problem. That's the part I've got to break. But yes, I've done stuff for newspapers and both local and national newspapers and stuff like that. And I have sent stuff to magazines. I need to get far more involved. There's a lot more work today. In the old days, you would send it to like a Getty or a Reuters, and they would do the work. Now it's everybody's an independent contractor. Everybody is trying to sell, and these micro stock sites don't help. because it's volume, volume, volume. Not putting them down in any way. It's just it's a different setup. And part of the thing is it's a pleasure for me. I like posting a gorgeous photograph that I think is attractive and getting the reaction. I'm not so interested in the likes. I'm interested in the comments and the shares. I like it when people share my work because my model is to make money off the print. Whether that's successful or not, we will see in the future, but poverty is a wonderful place to be.
Suffering creates suffering is art. Is that yeah.
Artists will always suffer.
Yeah. So I think we could probably talk quite a bit longer, but I know you got to get going. Whenever I get video up, I will have you back, and we'll actually post some of your pictures on while we're talking, and we could probably discuss some of the locations. Where can people find your work?
My website's the best place. It's www.drewmayphotography.com. Uber simple.
And then you're on Facebook.
I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
Drew May Photo. I don't know how they do that. I'm also on Twitter, Drew May Photo. I'm on Instagram. I'm keeping a theme here, Drew May Photo. I'm also on 500px, which is another site that I use quite effectively. And again, Drew May Photo. I tried to keep it simple.
What I'll do is I'll get all your information. I'll make sure that there's links posted with this podcast when it gets sent out. So if anybody is interested in purchasing or viewing Drew's stuff, by all means, go and do it. And I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. So I think it's been a great talk. I'm glad you came in.
Glad I'm here.
Drew and I have been talking for a while online, but we never actually met each other, so this has been a bit of a treat for me. And definitely have him back because he's an opinionated guy on other things.
And I'm a damn good-looking fellow.
But he's a big Norse god-looking man, so we'll get him on video. But I appreciate you coming in. And
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For everybody else, thanks for listening, and stay tuned. We got more interesting podcasts coming up, so take care.